Recall our search for what is the transgression, who are the transgressors. Our key text and starting point was, "And an host was given him against the daily by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground." Daniel 8:12. We began our search for answers by looking for all other occurrences of the term transgression and the related term transgressor. We found that there were 3 other such texts: Daniel 8:13, Daniel 8:23, and Daniel 9:24. First, we looked at Daniel 8:13. Here was the structure we found for Daniel 8:10 through 13. Recall that verse 13, the lower half of the chiasm, is a question in regard to the attack of the little horn on heaven, the upper half of the chiasm, verses 10 through 12, and recall that we noted that it could potentially contain more details on that attack. Recall the crucial finding from layer 3. The transgression is the transgression of desolation. That is, the transgression mentioned in verse 12, it would be more precise to call it the transgression of desolation. Now we look at Daniel 9:24. Here's the structure of Daniel 9:24 through 27. We will pause a few moments here and let you absorb it in, but not too long. First, we will look at verse 24. The structure of Daniel 9:24. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people, and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Note the following words: the transgression, sins, and iniquity. Note also and, 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 and. 5 ands. These ands are a property of the Hebrew text. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 phrases. Need more proof? Note the verbs: to finish, to make an end, to make reconciliation, to bring in, to seal up, and to anoint. 6 verbs. Here is the Hebrew of the text. Hebrew is read from right to left. Note the Hebrew verb of phrase 2, translated to make an end in the English. The same Hebrew verb occurs in phrase 5, where it is translated to seal up. Note the count of the Hebrew words in our 6 phrases. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. People do not normally write like this. There is an obvious division here. 2-word Hebrew phrases. 3-word Hebrew phrases. 1, 2, 3. So take note of these exceptional properties of this text. 3 2-word Hebrew phrases, and 3-word Hebrew phrases. The second phrase in each set of 3 phrases makes use of the same Hebrew verb. In the first set of phrases, each phrase out of the 3 mentions a term for sin, transgression, sin, and iniquity. None of these properties of this text that I have mentioned are by accident, but are by design. There are 2 separate and distinct parts here. Now we look at verses 26 and 27. Daniel 9:26 and 27. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Note, repetition is generally an indicator of structure. Weeks. Week. And week. These are all the occurrences of weeks, week. Desolations. Desolate. And desolate. These are all the occurrences of desolations, desolate. Determined. And determined. These are all the occurrences of determined. Looks like a repetition or parallel. So here is our parallel structure. Reading the text according to the structure. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Note, I must emphasize the fact that all color-coded words, words with the same color, are underlyingly the same Hebrew. That is the words week, weeks, desolate, desolations, and determined. We shall ignore the bottom half of this structure for the moment and focus completely on the upper half. How do we know the upper half is a unit and deals with the Messiah, aside from the occurrences of weeks? Note the word be cut off. Also the word the covenant. These words are connected. The covenant which they had made before me, when they cut the calf in twain, and passed between the parts thereof. Jeremiah 34:18. The Hebrew words occurring here in Daniel 9:26 and 27, translated as be cut off and the covenant, are the exact same Hebrew words occurring in Jeremiah 34:18, translated as the covenant and cut. Daniel describes the ancient practice of making or cutting a covenant. This is what Strong's Dictionary says of the Hebrew word translated be cut off. Karath, a primitive root, to cut, off, down, or asunder, by implication to destroy or consume. Specifically, to covenant, i.e., make an alliance or bargain, originally by cutting flesh and passing between the pieces. This is the type of covenant described in Genesis 15, the first picture or description of the covenant practice given in Scripture, and describes the covenant made between Abraham and God. Interestingly, God is the only one that walks between the cut in two animals, perhaps signifying that he would take all the responsibility of the covenant on himself. So when Christ died on the cross, God was cutting a covenant with us, using the same ancient practice that had been used from the beginning of Bible times. But can't you see a certain beauty here? Yes, Christ is our sacrifice, but we live under the New Testament or covenant, so shouldn't there be a making of a covenant? Now you should be able to see that making of the covenant more clearly. But there is more. The text says, He, the Messiah, shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. We read that when Christ died on the cross, Jesus said, "It is finished," and he bowed his head and gave up the ghost. John 19:30. It is finished? What is finished? Did not his death, his sacrifice, cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease? This understanding of Christ's cry is confirmed by the Scriptures. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. Isn't this what we just read about in John? And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom. Matthew 27:50 and 51. So Christ cries, "It is finished," and then the veil in the temple rips in two, letting all look into the most holy place, desecrating it and revealing the truth that God's dwelling, his seat, was no longer there. Notice some other connections that you may not have recognized before. Be cut off means to cut in two, as we saw in to cut a covenant. But this is connected to the midst, as in the midst of the week. The Hebrew for midst, Ketsi, is derived from the primitive root ka-tsa, meaning to divide, cut in two. But there is another connection with be cut off. Our veil, of course, which is rent in twain. Now we need to look at verse 25. Daniel 9:25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. This commandment or decree to restore and build Jerusalem went into effect in 457 BC. The decree is recorded in Ezra 7:12 through 26. It was given in the 7th year of the reign of Artaxerxes, and went into effect in the 5th month. See verses 7 through 9. And thou, Ezra, after the wisdom of thy God that is in thine hand, set magistrates and judges, which may judge all the people that are beyond the river, all such as know the laws of thy God, and teach ye them that know them not. Ezra 7:25. Here we see that this decree gives the Jews the right of self-government, to set up judges and judge the people by God's law, Mosaic law. But to a Jew, such as Ezra or Nehemiah, it would have meant more, and goes beyond the simple wording of the decree. In Israel, judges sat at the gate to give judgment, for Deuteronomy 16:18 reads, "Judges and officers shalt thou make in all thy gates." Thus for a Jew, the right of self-government included the right to have walls around your city. This would explain why Nehemiah, when he comes to Jerusalem some 13 years later, immediately starts building the walls of the city, despite having no decree stating he can. Now we need to clarify something concerning the Messiah the Prince. A pattern is set. The Messiah the Prince. Daniel 9:25. Note, the Hebrew word translated prince here, strong number 5057, is rather unique and occurs in Daniel in only 3 places, here, in verse 9:26, and in verse 11:22. By its uniqueness, we are meant to realize that this is no ordinary prince, and so implies 1. The Messiah, Daniel 9:26a, should be understood as the Messiah the Prince. And 2. The Prince, Daniel 9:26b, should also be understood as the Messiah the Prince. The confirmation, the Prince of the Covenant, Daniel 11:22. As we mentioned previously, the Hebrew translated prince here is the same unique word translated prince in Daniel 9:25, but that would imply this is to be understood as the Messiah, the Prince of the Covenant. Recall, it is the Messiah and only the Messiah that makes a covenant, verses 26 and 27. But this then also would imply that this Prince of the Covenant should be understood as the Messiah, the Prince of the Covenant. Everything thus makes perfect sense. The pieces all fit into place and the puzzle is complete. The ramification. And the people of the Messiah the Prince that shall come, that is the Jews, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Daniel 9:26b. So the Jews destroyed themselves. This is seen in 2 ways. Recall the outer layer of the chiasm of Daniel 9:24 through 27. This layer applies to the Jewish nation. The upper half of Daniel 9:24, that is Daniel 9:24a, defines the Jewish nation, Daniel's people, by the words transgression, sins, and iniquity. In other words, sin. The lower half of Daniel 9:26 and 27, in other words, Daniel 9:26b and 27b, describes the Jewish nation, Jerusalem, and the sanctuary with the phrases desolations determined and desolate, determined, desolate. But this is precisely Daniel 8:13's the transgression of desolation. In other words, according to Daniel 8:13 and Daniel 9:24 through 27, the desolation of the Jewish nation was a direct result of continued and persistent transgression. Now, what is the second reason for their desolation? The pattern, abomination of desolation. Set up the abomination of desolation. The church unites with the state. The Jews unite with Rome, who by the mouth of thy servant David hast said, Why did the heathen rage and the people imagine vain things? The kings of the earth stood up, and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his Christ. For of a truth, against thy holy child Jesus, whom thou hast anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, with the Gentiles and the people of Israel, were gathered together. Acts 4:25 through 27. Persecution by the church through the state. Rome crucifies Christ. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. Desolation. The state turns on the church. Rome destroys Jerusalem. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. In other words, the desolation of the Jewish nation was also a direct result of it joining itself to Rome, an abominable union in God's sight, whoredom, in order to kill Christ, God's own Son. So in search of what the transgression is, and who the transgressors are, we looked at Daniel 8:13. And we finished with that text. Then we looked at Daniel 9:24, and we finished with that text. Now we need to look at our last text, Daniel 8:23. When the transgressors are come to the full. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. Daniel 8:23. We have seen that the transgressors are the Jews, or more precisely, the Jewish nation. What is their kingdom? The Maccabees, 168 to 63 BC. Recall the four horns of the goat. Recall that the pleasant land, or Judea, is the west horn, which makes it part of the goat, or Satan. The kingdom of the Maccabees, spawn of the goat, the devil. And making a gathering, he sent 12,000 drachmas of silver to Jerusalem for sacrifice to be offered for the sins of the dead, thinking well and religiously concerning the resurrection. For if he had not hoped that they that were slain should rise again, it would have seemed superfluous and vain to pray for the dead. And because he considered that they who had fallen asleep with godliness had great grace laid up for them, it is therefore a holy and wholesome thought to pray for the dead, that they may be loosed from sins. 2 Maccabees 12:43 through 46. Douay-Rheims version. Where in the Bible are we ever told to pray for the dead? This is only one step away from praying to the dead. 70 weeks of probation. Then came Peter to him and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus saith unto him, I say not unto thee, until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. Matthew 18:21 and 22. The Jewish nation had God's forgiveness available to it for 70 times 7, or 490 years. Daniel 9's 70 weeks. But then probation closed, and there was no more forgiveness, only on-rushing, unstoppable desolation. I must stop at this point for a moment and state something very important. God loves the Jewish people, but they can only be saved one way, like all others. Jesus saith unto him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. John 14:6. And the Father goes on crying, turn ye from your evil ways, for why will ye die, O house of Israel? Ezekiel 33:11. The 2300 days and the 70 weeks. Are they connected? Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint, which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2300 days. Then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. Daniel 8:13 and 14. 2300 days. Here's our 2,300 days timeline. We don't know when it starts, and we don't know when it ends. How long the vision concerning the transgression of desolation? And the answer is 2,300 days. So we put the transgression of desolation as part of our 2,300 days timeline. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Daniel 9:24 through 27. 70 weeks. Here's our 70 weeks timeline. We don't know when it starts and we don't know when it ends. Actually, we do know when the 70 weeks starts. It starts in 457 BC, as we saw earlier, with the decree of Artaxerxes giving self-government to the Jews in Jerusalem. 70 weeks to finish the transgression, make an end of sins, make reconciliation for iniquity. So we put transgression as part of our 70 weeks timeline. During the 70 weeks, the Jews rebel against the Seleucid Empire, a Hellenistic kingdom descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals, Seleucus I. This takes place in 168 BC. They set up the Maccabean monarchy, which loses its independence when Pompey comes in 63 BC and makes it a dependent kingdom under Rome. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance shall stand up. Daniel 8:23. The transgressors are, of course, the Jews. Recall that the king of fierce countenance is the little horn of the north, Rome in the person of Pompey. The kingdom is, of course, the kingdom of the Maccabees, which we said arose out of Alexander the Great's former empire, a horn from the he-goat. The 70 weeks of probation for the Jewish nation, upon thy people to finish transgression, come to an end in 34 AD. 7 years prior to this, in 27 AD, the Messiah, Christ, is anointed, then dies a sacrificial death after 3.5 years, in the midst of the week in 30 AD. The last 3.5 years, AD 30 to 34, is God's final attempt to reach the Jewish nation and encompasses the time period from Christ's resurrection to the stoning of Stephen and the going of the gospel to the Gentiles through the Apostle Paul. Desolations are determined. He shall make it desolate. That determined shall be poured upon the desolate. The city and the sanctuary are destroyed. As we saw when studying the chiasm of Daniel 9:24 through 27, the transgression as well as the sin and iniquity of verse 24a are inseparably linked to the desolations, desolate and desolate of verses 26b and 27b. The desolation of the Jewish nation is a direct result of the transgression, sin, iniquity of that nation. The desolation of the Jewish nation, which occurs after the close of the 70 weeks of probation, occurs in two phases. First, the temple and city are destroyed in 70 AD during the Great Revolt of 66 to 73 AD, and then the nation is destroyed as a result of the Bar Kokhba revolt of 132 through 136 AD, when the practice of the Jewish faith is forbidden. The Judean communities are extensively depopulated and the Jews become a minority there. Judea is renamed Syria Palestina, and Jerusalem is re-established as the Roman pagan polis of Aelia Capitolina, with a temple to Jupiter taking the Jewish temple's previous place on the Temple Mount, and Jews barred from entering it, except on the day of Tisha B'Av. Recall that we previously saw this destruction in Daniel 8:9 as the little horn which waxed exceeding great toward the pleasant land, the west horn, as well as in Daniel 8:23 and 24, the angelic interpretation of Daniel 8:9, as the king of fierce countenance, whose power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, who shall destroy wonderfully, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. But the desolation of the nation is a delayed desolation. For Jesus declared in 30 AD, just prior to his crucifixion, "Behold, your house is left unto you desolate." Matthew 23:38. The underlying Hebrew makes it clear that the transgression and desolation of the Jewish nation, that is the 70-week prophecy, is the transgression of desolation of the 2,300 days, and so is part of that prophecy. How long shall be the vision concerning the transgression of desolation? Unto 2,300 days. Since we have a starting point for the 70 weeks, it would seem logical that this also is the starting point for the 2,300 days. Determined. Hebrew, ka thak. A primitive root, properly to cut off. Strong's Hebrew Dictionary. The 70 weeks is cut off from the 2,300 days. That is, it is part of it. The 2,300 days comes to an end in 1844, when the sanctuary is cleansed, or more precisely begins to be cleansed.